You're listening to Secrets of the Royals, a podcast about the tragedies that befell the royal family. And we're your hosts, journalists and royal experts, Kerry and Maria. Hi, and welcome to Secrets of the Royals with myself, Kerry.
And Maria.
We're two journalists and old friends.
Very old friends.
Who have worked on newspapers and magazines for many years. Together, we share a passion for royal content. We run the Royal List newsletter over on Substack, which we'd love you to come and join us if you would like to.
Yeah, please do. One delivered every Sunday into your inbox.
So today we're going to talk about the tragedy of the other Prince George.
So in summary, he was a brother of King George VI and very much a popular and much loved member of the royal family. In World War II, he tragically died at the age of 39 in a mysterious plane crash on his way to Iceland to visit troops. Yes, so we'll be discussing his life and all that.
So he and his wife, Princess Marina, were the glamour couple of the day. It was an enormous loss to the royal family, but obviously was also lost in the midst of World War II.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? All this sort of tragedy, it's not in our living memory. So
no,
these stories are kind of lost now. But yeah, everyone just thinks, oh, Diana was obviously a terrible, terrible thing to happen to the royal family. But they did suffer lots of tragedies.
Before that, there were seismic events in the royal family history. It's very interesting to go back historically and read all the information and find out who all the players were and how deeply it affected the family. So
yeah, because he died 55 years before Diana. He was equally as popular and a bright young thing that the media loved, and also a young parent with 3 children.
Let's place who exactly he was. When was he born and who was he?
Yeah, so he was born in 1902. He was the brother of King George VI, our late Queen's dad, and also brother of King Edward VIII.
Yes, as we've discussed, was king for a very short time, and also brother of the tragic Prince John, who died at 13 in Sandringham. He suffered from epilepsy. There's a lot of tragedy in that family and scandal in that family.
He was very close to Prince John, actually. There was only 3 years between them.
He was deeply affected, wasn't he? It's interesting, though, that family was so eventful and so much tragedy and scandal that it then makes so much more sense why, when the Queen's father, King George, took the throne, that he was so determined that he had to rule calmly and quietly. So much so that when he died, I was reading recently in Craig Brown's new book about how the critics were quite vocal about how boring he was, but he would have probably been pleased about that.
Yeah,
because he was trying to bring that stability back. It's quite interesting. The Queen also continued that.
George and his brothers, they had a very difficult father, because King George, again, reading that latest Craig Brown book, he refers to King George V's official biographer, who just called him the stuffiest, dreariest king ever, and spent about 17 years just killing animals and sticking stamps in books, and had no intellectual curiosity or empathy at all. So these poor boys, there's certain things you can't forgive Edward VIII for, but they were all basically drilled into the Royal Navy, whether they wanted to be or not. He was not a great father. So when they eventually, 3 of them, George, Albert and Henry, had their own family, they tried to create just a loving environment that they never had.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and
they changed it.
Yeah, tried to change that.
So let's go back to George history. Then. So he's growing up.
Yes, so he's growing up in York House. He was sent off to school in Broadstairs at the age of 12, and then he was basically press ganged by his father into Dartmouth Naval College.
Yeah.
And had to join the Royal Navy, which he did in 1924, and stayed there until 1929, and hated every moment of it, from what I can discover.
But he did find a surprising career that he was passionate about, didn't he?
Yes, he finally left the Royal Navy, and he'd suffered from terrible seasickness. So can you imagine 4 or 5 years of being sick all the time. Yes, he became the first royal to join the civil service. So eventually he did a bit of a stint in the Foreign Office, but then eventually moved to the Home Office and actually loved being a factory inspector. But yeah, he loved visiting factories around the country and would often overstay his welcome for several hours just chatting away. So basically had to be dragged away because he just loved talking about how things were put together and meeting real people. He had a real common touch. He got on very well with people. He was said to be the brightest of the Windsors at the time.
Yeah.
He was very artistic. He was very cultured. He was very intelligent. So yeah, he was the full package, I guess.
And he was very naughty. So tell me about some of the
he was a bit of a naughty boy.
About his antics. He liked to party and he liked to...
He had a kind of wingman in his older brother, Edward, who was 8 years older. In his memoirs, King Edward, what's it called? The King's Story. It came out in 1951 and he talked about, even though George was 8 years younger, they shared many of the same characteristics and they became very close. They became more than just brothers, they became great friends. George and Edward set up Royal Party Central in York House, part of St. James's Palace, in the late 20s, early 30s. And yeah, they're fast-living royal princes about town. They loved cars, flying, skiing, holidays, all the clubs in London. There was one called the Embassy, the Kit Kat. They were there most nights with their mistresses, with other debutantes. Yeah, so remember those pictures like William and Harry when they were out partying. Just go back to the early 1930s and that would be Edward and George.
But he also partied a bit too hard, didn't he?
Yes, so much so that even Edward was very alarmed and had to save him, so it must have been bad. He got involved in a bad crowd and became hooked on cocaine and morphine, as you do. So he fell for a socialite called Kiki Preston, who was known as the girl with the silver syringe, and she herself was addicted to heroin. So yeah, not great. And so Edward stepped in because things got really bad with George. Edward stepped in, kidnapped him, took him to a home somewhere, and he went cold turkey. And he even then hired a detective to keep an eye on George to make sure that he didn't fall into bad ways again. His affair with Kiki also fueled the rumours of he didn't just love women, he loved men as well. So there were loads of bisexual rumours of illegitimate children. It was rumoured that Kiki persuaded him to have a threesome with herself and the son of an Argentinian ambassador to the UK, which has been documented. He was very good friends with Noel Coward. They were lifelong friends. He had a passion for the arts, and George was a very good pianist as well. And there were rumours that Noel was also his secret lover, but Noel's long-term partner says no.
Isn't there an interesting connection with Rain Spencer, who obviously then went on to become Princess Diana's stepmother? Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, obviously George, gorgeous George as he was known at the time, got around a bit. And one of the people he had an affair with was the novelist Barbara Cartland, who's Rain's mother. And at one point, Barbara did allege that George was the father of her daughter, Rain. Whether this is true or not, it's just speculation, but there was one point where she did allege this. But also, he did have affairs with the Duchess of Argyll, who was the famous Duchess, with their own scandals.
And so, and wasn't there another illegitimate son called Michael?
Yeah, Michael Temple Canfield. So this is interesting. Going back to Kiki Preston, she then alleged that she had a love child with George, Michael, who she then had adopted out to American friends of hers, because I don't know, did I mention she was the cousin of Gloria Vanderbilt?
Oh, that's right.
She was incredibly well connected. So Michael was placed with American adopted parents. And later, the Duke of Windsor, Edward VIII, George's brother, he met Michael and his wife, Laura, in 1960 and went for lunch with them and was totally convinced that Michael was his brother's son, because the likeness apparently was so remarkable.
Thank you to our hotel partner, the Soho Hotel, where we recorded this episode. In the heart of London's Soho, this gorgeous hotel is a favourite destination of Kerry's. Book at firmdalehotels.com. moving on, he finally did get married, didn't he? And not only did he get married, but he ended up having a society wedding of the year, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. He fell in love with his second cousin, Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark, who coincidentally was the first cousin of our late Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip. He fell madly in love with her. She was this chic, gorgeous European princess. And they got married in November 1934 at Westminster Abbey. The nation was delirious because I don't think there'd been a big royal wedding since Prince Albert got married in 1923. So they'd waited a long time for another one. And it was the first royal wedding to be broadcast by radio.
From what I remember, big crowds would try to see them wherever they went. Yes. Really glamorous.
Yeah, they became the toast of high society, and they attracted so much media attention. It was comparable to Diana and Charles at that time. They were the toast of the town. They had a home in Belgrave Square, which is just behind Buckingham Palace. It was full of all the society top people of the day. She was incredibly chic, and everyone wanted to look like her. She became a fashion icon in the way that Diana did. So as a couple, they were basically the royal stars of the show, the royal family.
So they went on to have 3 children, didn't they?
Yes, yes. She gave birth fairly quickly. So she had our present Duke of Kent, Edward, followed by Princess Alexandra and Prince Michael of Kent.
So that really is interesting because a lot of, to explain where that side of the family comes from and their relationship to the royal family. So we're now leading up to the Second World War. So even though he hated being in the Navy, he then had to re-enter service, didn't he, in the Second World War?
But just before that, he was announced as the Governor-General of Australia in 1938.
Oh, so yes.
Which is sadly, so couldn't take up the position.
Yes, that's a really good point. The Second World War delayed his appointment. He died in the Second World War and then never took up that position. So in the end, then his brother had to take it up, didn't he?
Prince Henry, Duke of Gloucester.
Who did become the Governor-General. He was the Governor-General that never was.
He and Marina were very much looking forward to going.
They would have been.
They'd packed up, they had a lovely country estate, Coppins, in Buckinghamshire, getting ready to go. They were really excited, and the war broke out in 1939.
And not only did that scupper his plans, but it ended his life.
Tragically, he re-entered service during the war, and his brother Prince Henry did their bit for the country. He'd always had a passion for the RAF, so he became an air commodore. He flew about the year that he died. He'd already flown thousands of miles. He'd been to Canada to visit troops and meet people there. On the 25th of August, 1942.
Again, the end of August.
Again, the end of August. I know.
It's really, honestly, if I was a member of the royal family, I don't know, I think I'd just stay home.
Not leave your house that last week of August. No, definitely not.
So, sorry,
it's really on. So he was up in Scotland. He was leaving to visit RAF Reykjavik in Iceland to visit troops and boost morale. It was just another one of his journeys. I'm sure he didn't think much of it, and he missed his family desperately when he did these things. And also we have to remember his third child, Prince Michael, was only 7 weeks old. So this was probably I think it was his first engagement back, really. And obviously, Princess Marina always worried about him, but he went and did his duty. The plane, which was a Sutherland flying boat, took off with a really experienced pilot. He was also Australian. I think his name was Flight Lieutenant Frank Goyen. They were all experienced. Unfortunately, within about 40 minutes of takeoff, the plane hit a mountain called Eagles Rock, up in the Highlands of Scotland, about 250 miles north of Edinburgh. And there was 15 people on board. 14 people were killed in the Duke of Kent, Prince George. There was one survivor, Andrew Jack, who was a rear gunner. As the plane hit the mountain, the tail sheared off, and he went
with it.
He was thrown free, wasn't he?
Because interestingly, the rear gunners, I mean, that was a terrible job to have. Oh my God. You know, they were so exposed. And I thought that was the most dangerous. And then how ironic that in this
Because,
it
because of where
him.
he was.
Yeah.
He was the survivor.
Now, this is still the Second World War, and there were many conspiracy theories about this. So tell me about that.
Yeah, there were several conspiracy theories. One of them was that he was on his way to Sweden, not Iceland, to negotiate some secret peace deal with the Nazis. Another one was that because of his relationship with his brother Edward, he may have harbored Nazi sympathies. Also that British intelligence were the ones that had downed the plane. Yeah, I think that's rather far-fetched because he was very loyal. That was a crazy theory that was out there. There was another theory that he was in fact flying the plane when it crashed because he was a keen pilot.
And wasn't there a woman?
Yeah, well, there were two theories about this. Obviously, his bisexual love life was brought up. And there was one theory that there was a secret lover on board that wasn't accounted for, and that was a woman. But then there's another theory that it was a man.
Oh, really?
So, make of that what you will.
Interestingly, though, when you do read a lot of Second World War history, the female spies that were being sent over to France, parachuted into France, technically didn't exist because they were a very secret division that didn't actually technically exist. And after the war, they didn't talk about it for many years.
Yeah, so he could very well have had somebody on board.
So there are all sorts of layers you could go into that, yes, it could have been some sort of scandal, but also it could have been a woman doing something that they didn't do.
And also, weirdly, after the investigation that took place, all the documents mysteriously disappeared.
Yeah.
So that's another one that was like, what's happened there? Andrew Jack, the survivor, his niece once said that he confided in her that while he was recovering in hospital, he was visited by the Secret Service or the British intelligence and made to sign a Secrets Act that he wouldn't talk about the accident and what he saw, because he told his niece that he believed George was flying the aircraft, and what happened, that the pilot was blamed. It was decided it was pilot error, and he felt guilty apparently until the day he died, because he felt that he knew the truth but wasn't able to say it. So again, that's another, but also I just think whatever happened, it was just a tragic waste of 14 lives and a royal death. And it was the first royal death in 450 years of a royal who was on military duty. So, and obviously Marina was devastated. They'd only been married for 8 years. She was only 36. He was 39. They had 3 kids. The oldest was 6, 5, and 7 weeks old. It was devastating for them all. The royal family obviously rallied around. A lot's made of George VI's death being hastened by the war. I think Churchill wrote something about during the funeral he'd never seen the king so upset. The king was crying, as was Prince Henry. After the war, the king gave a speech in the Houses of Parliament, and when he mentioned his brother's death, that was the only time apparently that his voice cracked. So, I think it had a massive impact on the king and a massive impact on the family. And obviously, poor little 6-year-old Edward became the Duke of Kent at a very young age. And he's still the Duke of Kent. He's 88 now.
Well, there you go. What a story. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. And I hope you've all enjoyed listening and watching.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, do share with your friends and subscribe to the Royal List newsletter over on Substack.